righty. First and foremost, everyone should know that March 30th is the deadline for all the things that we're talking about here. And you can always go to serverisland.com/grants for all the information about this funding opportunity, for all the resources we provide about different sections of the application or other questions that you might have, including if questions are submitted to us through email or phoned in, we will document the question and also the response that we gave and continuously upload that to that website in a question and answer document so that all applicants have access to that. Our presentation today is really centered around four main questions. What is AmeriCorps anyway? What's the purpose of this AmeriCorps grant program? How can you apply? And then trying to address your specific questions. So anything that's as awesome as AmeriCorps is a little bit complicated. And if you're here, you probably already know something about AmeriCorps already, and you know about some of those complications. It's both the name of a federal agency, originally known as the Corporation for National and Community Service, but it also represents sort of four main resources that are available across the country, thousands of grantees and partners who are leading tens of thousands of AmeriCorps members to address different community needs. Fundamentally, though, the idea is about bringing people together from all sorts of different backgrounds to serve communities with their time, effort, skills to get specific things done, addressing a community need that will enrich the lives of those who are served, but at the same time, helping to learn and grow through our service. What's important to ServeRI is calling attention to this twofer that AmeriCorps programs in Rhode Island work to both enrich the lives of those who are served by getting those things done, but second, those who serve, providing them a pathway to education, future careers, or leadership roles that'll help strengthen our states. AmeriCorps provides annual funding to the state based on our population. That's why we call this the state formula funding. And ServeRI, this commission appointed by the governor, is authorized to subgrant these funds to you. And using those funds, you'll create new positions at your organization and invite folks to long-term volunteer assignments in AmeriCorps to help address the community needs. I want to emphasize that AmeriCorps is a human resource project. So more than looking at this application as a funding request, you're really looking at developing a human resource and managing a human resource. Those human resources are going to help you extend your reach using people power to increase the capacity of your organization. They're going to bring in new perspectives and diversity from the background of all the folks who are joining AmeriCorps and coming into your organization with their own lived experiences. And you're going to be developing leaders who might go on to work at your organization in the future or in the fields that you're most passionate about. And when you participate in AmeriCorps, you become part of an AmeriCorps family and network that collaborates together and also sort of can raise your profile with potentially other philanthropic or federal funding partners. As you think about AmeriCorps as this human resource project, you really need to consider your own capacity and commitment to AmeriCorps member management, because you're taking on a project to recruit, train, place, and supervise a team of humans that we call AmeriCorps members. By recruit, I mean that while ServRI and AmeriCorps support your outreach, you're expected to recruit your own AmeriCorps participants, developing position descriptions, the application process, and how you'll select them. When those folks arrive, you're going to provide them an orientation to your community, to your organization, and train them to carry out the service activities that you've planned. You're going to think about their daily schedule and where they go to serve every day. And you're going to think about a system to track their success. How are you monitoring their progress? What kind of data are you collecting to show that their service has an impact? I want to make a special note that something that's been coming up more and more when I talk about placing the AmeriCorps members into a service, and that is the increase of organizations that exist virtually that may not pay office rental space now as a nonprofit organization, may expect members to do teleservice, is what we would call it, remote work. Those are all okay, but they are carefully monitored. An AmeriCorps member must have a physical place that is the majority, where they spend the majority of their time. Doesn't necessarily mean it's your organization. If your organization exists with a virtual office, but they need a place where they go and do direct service as part of the AmeriCorps state and national program that we operate. So that might be a school or a community center, a place where summer camp activities take place, a place where environmental projects get done, or clients get counseling services of some kind, but there needs to be a real concrete address. And at that address, there's going to be supervision. It's not always exciting, but one of the critical tasks of having an AmeriCorps program is time management, recording when the AmeriCorps member serves, and because they are trying to complete a certain number of hours in their term of service. And you're giving feedback to them about how their service is going and what they can do to improve. When we read applications from you, we often hear about these things kind of parroted back to us, that you're going to do them. But sometimes what's lost is the details of how you intend to do all these things. How are you going to recruit? How are you going to train? And how are you going to place and supervise AmeriCorps members? If you're not familiar with some of the basic rules of who AmeriCorps members are, there are just some fundamental requirements. AmeriCorps members have to be age 17 or older. We say 17 to alive. The majority of members in Rhode Island may be in their 20s, but we have a strong cohort in the 35 to 50 range, as well as AmeriCorps members well into their 80s. Participants in AmeriCorps have to have a high school diploma or be working towards one. And I would say that currently in Rhode Island, the majority of members have some college or a college degree. Participants in this federal program must be US citizens or have permanent resident status. It's written into law, and we're unable to affect that requirement. There's also a thorough criminal history screening process that we call the National Service Criminal History Check. It involves a willingness of the participant to be fingerprinted, for an FBI background check, to have the state police run here in Rhode Island a background check, and to verify that they do not appear on a sexual offense registry. AmeriCorps takes this very seriously to safeguard the community in which individuals are serving. And in fact, failure to follow the guidance and procedures that we'll provide about the National Service Criminal History Check can actually result in having to repay back the grant funds that you've received. So it's a big part of program management and a willingness to learn and follow the background check procedures. You, though, get to determine other aspects of the individual that you think will be suitable for your program. When you have your own application and selection process, you can decide different characteristics that might make sense to fit your program, as long as they cover these few basic eligibility rules. AmeriCorps members do receive benefits for their service. As the saying goes, membership has its privileges. First and foremost, folks might be familiar with the concept of a living allowance. While AmeriCorps members are not employees and they are in a volunteer role, AmeriCorps allows them to receive a cash stipend that we call the living allowance, and is meant to help do that, pay for food and shelter. In Rhode Island, currently, I think most folks are trying to support their AmeriCorps members at or above an equivalent of minimum wage. And we'll talk more about living allowance when we talk about the specific application requirements. AmeriCorps members can also put federal student loans into deferment while they serve. They actually earn, when they complete their term of service, a scholarship called the AmeriCorps Education Award. We'll go over the specific value of that award. That award is separate from the grant application process. It's not something that the program itself needs to manage. Many individuals, of course, join the service for their own purposes, maybe a personal commitment, a cultural or religious reason. AmeriCorps can kind of be an adventure, where many folks are looking for a way to take direct action for causes that are of their passion project, or to make a real difference in the community. And they might be also looking to get into a new career field, or just explore something new about themselves or about work in the community. Ideally, for them, the real benefit is kind of a transformative experience, and you're going to be a big part of helping to design that. AmeriCorps is also very specific about some prohibited activities that AmeriCorps members and you as staff, when participating in the AmeriCorps program, are not allowed to engage in. And those are things like influencing legislation, participating in political activities, boycotts or strikes, participating in religious instruction, or participating in voter registration. Of course, you could all do these things as private citizens, but not while tracking time as an AmeriCorps member, or tracking time as a paid staff member charged to an AmeriCorps grant. When you design an AmeriCorps program or identify a community need for us, that can be literally anything. AmeriCorps has, however, kind of bucketed for itself 6 areas of what they call focus areas. And you may see this information when you read materials about AmeriCorps: disaster services, economic opportunity, education, environmental stewardship, healthy futures, and veterans and military affairs. But I want to let you all know that you can, in fact, address any community need through your AmeriCorps project. This is where I've been talking and lecturing for a good 10, 15 minutes, and I like to just kind of check back in and see if I've lost everyone, if you're awake out there. Remind you that we are being recorded. And if you want to turn your camera off or feel uncomfortable with that, by all means, I understand, but we want to make this available to others who aren't able to be here right now in the moment. And I'm really curious if anyone would be willing to just share in the chat or unmute themselves and let us know what you're thinking about. How are you looking to make service a strategy to meet a community need? Either just broad topic or as specific as you want. Hannah, did you just unmute?
I did.
So brave. Nice to see you.
Hi, I'm Hannah. I work at Meeting Street. We have a career exploration program for Carter School, which is our high schoolers with special medical needs. And we've been trying to get them out into the community to get jobs. And it's been a little bit hard getting businesses to become that interested in it. And I was hoping that we could get some possibly AmeriCorps members to get out into the community, get businesses interested in working with our kids, and also have those volunteers as like co-workers, like
Mhm.
co-ports with our students going out into the community, into those jobs.
Yeah, great. Thank you for sharing. We also have a chat in doing environmental education for K-12 students. And yeah, so we have two kind of AmeriCorps members interacting with students in our education bucket. Anyone else want to venture how service might be a strategy for you? Oh, chat. Uh, yeah, is this, yeah. So one of our current grantees who's recompeting has engaged the community, parents of preschool students, getting college, sorry, college ready, yes, kindergarten ready, um, and trying to do both parent education and supporting the students. And in particular, leaning into cultural competency and language competency so that they can really affect multilingual learners. Thanks. We want to prove that we're all human. I know that I get really lectury in this, and I know what it's like to be on the other end of those kinds of webinars. But here we go, back back anyway to it. Before I move on and talk about this specific opportunity, I do need to mention that AmeriCorps does have a number of resources. I want to mention this. While we are part of what's called state and national, where AmeriCorps provides funding to the Rhode Island Department of Education, and we, through ServerI, look to pass it on to you, our partners here in Rhode Island. There are other resources provided by AmeriCorps. There's a program referred to as NCCC. There's actually a residential campus in Mississippi, and once or twice a year, van loads of AmeriCorps members who are ages 17 to 26 will appear in Rhode Island for 6 weeks and just work and serve nonstop on a specific project. Most recently, they joined Habitat for Humanity this summer, building houses. Previous to that, they helped manage vaccination centers during the COVID pandemic. They've worked in repairing camp facilities here in Rhode Island for various nonprofit camp organizations. And it's just an interesting idea. The application process is something you can learn about at serverisland.com/grants. I'm happy to talk to folks about AmeriCorps and CCC if anything I'm saying is resonating with you. There's also a Northeast office for AmeriCorps that organizes all of New England and manages two branches of AmeriCorps called AmeriCorps Seniors and AmeriCorps Vista. At a very high level, Vista places a volunteer for a year at an anti-poverty organization, specifically to work in the office, building capacity, designing new programs, collecting data, fundraising, but they must have a meaningful capacity building project that they can complete. And AmeriCorps Seniors constitutes a number of different programs. There's a network of grant recipients that operate really continuously as partners with AmeriCorps here in Rhode Island, but you can approach community action programs primarily, or the Federal Hill House that has AmeriCorps senior programs, and look to see if an individual AmeriCorps senior might be able to come and provide volunteer services at your organization. So the approach there more is identifying who in Rhode Island manages regionally AmeriCorps senior projects and approaching them rather than AmeriCorps directly to find out if there are seniors who might be able to come and serve at your organization. But we're talking about our grant process, and just to mention that every state has a commission for national community service. We are SERV-RI at the Rhode Island Department of Education, and we have issued a notice of funding availability with a deadline of March 30th. So I want to come back to the twofer. SERV-RI has always viewed AmeriCorps as this two-part strategy to strengthening the state, but this notice of funding availability is very clear in its purpose statement that one should explain how you meet a community need, and two, support the learning and growth of AmeriCorps members. In practical terms, when you dig into the details, you'll see that the review process is scored 40 points for community need, 20 points for member development, but both aspects are there. I want to emphasize and hear from me that we want to convey that your organization has the heart of a teacher, recognizing that you're not creating a job, but a program that AmeriCorps members will participate in for a short time, leaving you with new attitudes, knowledge, and skills. Some of the ways that current AmeriCorps programs support members include the training they provide, coaching them with staff supervision, doing resume and interview workshops, doing strength or personality assessments, offering them a budget for self-directed professional development, sending them to conferences, doing additional diversity and equity training, or even providing them licenses or career certifications through a professional training program. AmeriCorps grants in Rhode Island should align with the state's goals. We particularly look to the Plan for Public Education and the McKee administration's Rhode Island 2030 plan. When you explain your community need, you might want to look into these strategic planning documents from the state and explain where the alignment is with the goals there. As part of your application, you're going to describe a community need in terms of a performance measure or an outcome that you want to achieve in the community, a change in knowledge, behavior, or condition. And again, while SERV-RI is open to any community need, we have listed in the notice specific AmeriCorps measures that we believe align with the Plan for Public Education and the Rhode Island 2030 plan. You'll find those. Welcome back to Jim. You'll find those on pages 6 and 7. And just to give you an example, it'll say education and then the number of students with improved school attendance, a very specific outcome. Or under climate, acres of public land improved, miles of trails, rivers, or shoreline improved. So make sure that when you are looking into the notice, you see those and figure out if that can describe the community need that you're trying to address. We also identify priorities for this funding opportunity. In a practical sense, 10 out of the 100 scored points during the review assessment of this application will be reserved for the priorities. Those priorities are municipal partnerships for education, service to career pathways, extending reach to underserved communities, and volunteer recruitment and management. It's not that you need to absolutely address these priorities, and it's not intended that you will describe how you do all four, which is something applicants usually seem to aim for. What we're really looking for is if it makes sense that you identify one priority and really explain how you are seeking to address that. So very briefly, I'm gonna just highlight these priorities. And then if you have any questions, again, don't forget to use the chat, which I'm going to reopen on my screen. And also feel free to interrupt and unmute yourself. But let's talk about municipal partnerships for education. This does not mean that you need to be a municipality, a mayor, or a city government to apply and receive this priority, but it does mean that there is some sort of meaningful collaboration with a municipal authority to carry out the service activities, either from a leadership and goal alignment or concrete logistical support, like the physical place that the service happens. As you may be familiar, Governor McKee has announced through the Learn 65 Rhode Island and Municipal Learning Center initiatives, this kind of core idea of education taking place with the support of the broader leadership of the community. And we're really interested to support that in any way that we can through the placement of AmeriCorps members. We'll let you be creative and use your innovation and imagination to tell us how that is possible in your local community. But the original intent, of course, was to extend learning time, providing activities after or before school or during vacation periods, including the summer. But we're really open to learning from you what a municipal partnership for education can mean. The next priority is service to career pathways. I already mentioned a twofer in terms of supporting the learning and growth of AmeriCorps members, but this is going farther in terms of identifying a specific profession or career field, having relationships to employers in that career field, and explaining what kind of training or licensure or certification you're really providing the AmeriCorps members so that when they complete their term of service, they are on a very specific path into a career. And I think that's self-explanatory. I think another way to think about it is how is it like an apprenticeship program? just as an example, we have operating in Rhode Island today a program called Accessing Home. Through the course of the year, the AmeriCorps members in that program earn Resident Service Coordinator certification, which is a specific job title in the public housing field. And when they have that certification, they can apply for positions in public housing that carry, pretty solid salaries above $50,000. So that's kind of a specific example of a service to career pathway. Funding priority 3 is extending the reach. And this is really broad conceptually. So we're interested in having a portfolio of AmeriCorps programs in Rhode Island that reflect the diversity of our state in all forms. So that means different geographies, different types of communities, small and large, but also really identifying folks who have historically been underrepresented or underserved. We're pretty concrete there in our language, which we copy from the way that AmeriCorps uses these terms. But we include communities of color, immigrants and refugees, people with disabilities, people who identify as LGBTQIA+, people with arrests and/or conviction records, and religious minorities. So it's really you helping us make sure that we are doing our job in being equitable in our distribution of this AmeriCorps program. We're also keenly aware of trying to multiply our impact. And one of the strategies that we can use to do that is to have AmeriCorps members operate as a leverage point to recruit and manage community volunteers. So we have one AmeriCorps member, right, who engages a team of 10, 50, 100 community volunteers, then they can potentially have a greater impact and help more folks. So all AmeriCorps members might at some point during their term of service work with other volunteers, but this is meant to be described as a very specific and deliberate effort where the AmeriCorps member thinks about member recruitment and management, gets trained in best practices and volunteer management and practice, and literally, serves as a leader of community volunteers who are actually the ones who might be addressing the community need that you describe. I haven't seen any questions in the chat, but I'll just hang for 1 second to see if there are questions about the funding priorities. The notice of funding also describes that we are offering both a traditional grant, which is an opportunity to have AmeriCorps members serve with you right out of the gate and to address the community need, but we're also offering the opportunity to apply for a planning grant. A planning grant is spending a year with us, Serve RI, to go through a process to explore and study what your AmeriCorps program would be. What would the design be? What community need would you address? And to help you build some capacity, either in terms of managing members, or maybe it's financial systems or data collection systems. That grant is different in that you submit a budget sort of in the range of $35,000 to $50,000, and we expect those funds to cover staff time or specific training opportunities that you might be availing yourself to, but there are no AmeriCorps members awarded in a planning grant. All right, now we're getting to the fun stuff. I'm pretty impressed with myself in terms of time management here. I have to say, I'm only like 9 minutes behind schedule. So, how do you apply for one of these AmeriCorps state grants through ServeRI? First and foremost, I think everyone on the call today is an eligible applicant, unless your organization is primarily organized for profit, lobbying government, or your executive director or board members have been convicted of federal crimes. You are eligible to apply for one of these grants. And there are a number of requirements that I would highlight for you in the notice of funding availability. You'll definitely want to review the full list and make sure that they make sense and something you want it for you and something you want to take on. The first is that we do have an AmeriCorps online system called eGrants. Applications have to go through the eGrant system, and AmeriCorps participants, our members, have to get enrolled into eGrant system. So you have to be willing to learn and use this wonderful online system. It is a federal grant resource, so your organization has to register with the federal government in what's called the System for Award Management, or SAM.gov, and maintain an active registration. If that's something unfamiliar with to you, or you aren't currently registered with, I would start that registration today or tomorrow, just to make sure that that doesn't hold up any awards in case it takes you extra time. There is cost sharing. So it is a fact that the AmeriCorps grants that we will provide will never fully fund the project that you imagine. Whether or not cost sharing is required through the grant that you receive, there is going to be additional staff time and effort. There are going to be additional physical, tangible, concrete, real costs that are going to be over and above and beyond the funding that AmeriCorps provides. I mentioned earlier that there is a significant criminal history check process that AmeriCorps requires, that we will support you in checking the AmeriCorps members. We also are very keen on AmeriCorps having a visual identity in the community. I am always wearing a vest, a fleece, a shirt, a button, a t-shirt that has the AmeriCorps logo on it. There's always an AmeriCorps poster, sign, banner in the background, or in my Zoom virtual. It just as a way, it's required in the grant terms and conditions, but is more about having a sense of AmeriCorps community and presence in the state to show that we are a collective movement. ServeRI also has monthly meetings that we invite grantees to participate in, to learn from each other, discuss grant management, and to plan and do some statewide events together. We collectively invite AmeriCorps members to take an oath of AmeriCorps service. We also do a physical service project over the Martin Luther King holiday and other statewide events that we expect folks to participate in. Yeah. Grant period. We're asking you to design a program that takes place between August 1st and July 31st, a 12-month period. If your program specifically has AmeriCorps members carrying out their main service activity in the summer, you can elect to start September 1. Our traditional grants are going to offer a 3-year funding commitment, and the planning grant is just for 1 year. with no requirements that you apply for future funding, but the opportunity to do so, to continue to apply to receive a traditional grant in the future. Just to complicate things, the notice of funding does describe a lot of different grant types. So I'm going to do my best to efficiently describe each of these. And as you identify what makes the most sense for the project that you want to carry out, you may have some more specific questions, but you should know that all of these types are available to you. And if you currently have received an AmeriCorps grant of one type or another in the past, you can apply for a different grant type under this competition. You do not have to maintain your current type of grant. So a traditional grant from a public agency is referred to as cost reimbursement. And this is my recommendation of where most folks would start. But as part of your application, you're going to submit a detailed budget of the costs that you incur. We do have a requirement that the personnel on the project be listed as spending at the equivalent of 0.5, half of a year or more. No problems with more in terms of staff working on the project. And grant payment, right, is on a monthly basis. Your organization will submit to us the costs that you incurred, and the Rhode Island Department of Education, on behalf of the state, will issue payment in reimbursement for those costs. There is another type of grant that we do offer called the fixed grant. These grants are paid based on the amount of service hours that AmeriCorps members complete. So there is no budget, really any detailed budget submitted with the application. And payment is based on the tracking of hours that members have completed by submitting timesheets. What I would recommend for this grant project is it's really suitable for small projects where only a couple of AmeriCorps members are being requested, or if you're an experienced operator with AmeriCorps and very confident in your ability to recruit and supervise members, because the cost reimbursement grant provides more flexibility in terms of the fact that during the course of a year, AmeriCorps members may or may not start in service. They may or may not earn hours, at which point you're receiving no, in a fixed grant, you would receive no grant payment for your efforts in managing the project. Whereas in a cost reimbursement grant, if you incur expenses for doing criminal background checks or for paying that 0.5 FTE minimum staff time requirement, or for a training activity, you can be reimbursed for those costs, regardless of the amount of hours that an AmeriCorps member has served. The benefit of the fixed grant is because there is no detailed budget, you are not having to have the administrative requirement of tracking expenses and reporting them to the state in quite the same way. So there is a administrative benefit to the fixed grant method that many, again, experienced AmeriCorps programs enjoy, and we offer that. You could also apply for an AmeriCorps grant that only provides much less funding. And that's because the intent is that there won't be a living allowance associated with the project, but AmeriCorps members can earn an education award. So this grant pays $800 when an AmeriCorps member starts their service project, regardless of how many hours they complete, or what expenses you may incur. And this grant it's kind of a specific and unique opportunity, and it's really kind of suitable if you're kind of partnering with a university or you have a real clear kind of education pathway that you're trying to support your AmeriCorps members with. There's also a professional corps grant. This is a grant where you demonstrate that there's a shortage of qualified professionals in a certain field, the most common one being education, where teachers have to get licensed. And you've designed a project where through national service, folks are recruited and placed into underserved areas and receive through the project that specific professional license or certification, and then receive a full salary from an employer, such as the school district, to carry out their profession. And finally, the planning grant, which we mentioned. So if you have specific questions about any of those, please feel free to ask, but I want to make sure that you paid attention to the fact that all of those different types are listed in the notice. Whereas the planning grant allows you to submit a budget and ask for a funding amount of anywhere up to $50,000. All these other AmeriCorps grant types list and what's called a cost for every member service year. And in terms of understanding how much funding this grant might provide your organization, you have to understand, one, what is the cost for the member service year? And two, what's a member service year? Because no other grant that you've applied to before has ever used such a term or mentioned such a thing. So when an individual enrolls in AmeriCorps, they agree to a term of service, which is measured in hours. And that might be 1,700 hours or 450 hours. Each one of the AmeriCorps terms is visible in the chart and described in the notice of funding. And you design a project to engage a certain amount of individuals in these different terms of service. There's no minimum or limit in the notice that tells you what you need to do. It depends on your project and what you're trying to accomplish, whether your AmeriCorps members will serve the equivalent of full-time work, 40 hours a week for 10 to 12 months and able to achieve 1,700 hours, or whether you're going to limit their engagement to a 9-week period. Will kind of determine what types of terms of service make the most sense. But 1,700 hours is considered a full traditional member service year, and everything less than 1,700 hours is a proportion of a member service year. So when figuring out the amount of funding that AmeriCorps will award you through our ServerI grant, first, traditionally, we've said you can have $26,000 for each member service year. And then you have to figure out multiply that amount times the number of service years that your project will be. And the only way to do that is to use the table that's in the notice and that I have on the screen now, because AmeriCorps has determined specific calculations with these long decimals that we all need to use. So just as a concrete example, I'm showing a proposal where there are going to be 4 full-time 1,700-hour AmeriCorps members, each one of these being valued at 1 member service year. And this project also, though, surges in the summer, providing perhaps a summer experience, a camp or something. And they increase their project with 24 AmeriCorps members who only do 300 hours over the summer months. Each one of these is a fraction of a member service year, and we plug them into the table to see that those 24 members add 5.08 member service years, bringing our total to 9.08 member service years for our project. So we multiply that by the maximum cost for each member service year that ServerI is offering, which is $26,000. And we see that our total award for this grant is $236,000. And the 80, don't forget the 80, $236,080. That means that when you're designing your budget, that is the maximum amount. You can request less, though I wouldn't recommend it. The maximum amount that you can have in your budget from AmeriCorps. All right, time check, chime gut check. The next thing to understand about a AmeriCorps grant is that if you are applying for the traditional cost reimbursement grant, there is a match requirement for the project. If you are in the first 3 years of or new to receiving an AmeriCorps grant, that match rate is 24%. So when putting together a budget for every expense that you plan, there's going to be some amount that is being funded by the AmeriCorps or Corporation for National Community Service share of the total. And there's going to be an amount that might be coming from your own other sources, whether that be your other fundraising efforts, another philanthropic partner, or another federal program that's helping to pay for some of this project. And when you build your budget, you'll be describing the amount of money that you're charging to the federal funding stream from AmeriCorps and the amount that you're supplying. The grantee share can be cash, but it can also be in-kind goods that you describe, such as donated supplies, personnel time from other community partners, donated consultant time. So you can identify non-cash match in the grantee share. During the program implementation phase, we are going to ask you to report the same as you do for the amount that you want to be reimbursed for, what funds have been expended as grantee share. And we're going to track that if you're not meeting the minimum requirement, we're not going to be able necessarily to reimburse you. Thank you for using the chat. There's a table in the notice of funding that shows that over the course of 10 years, the AmeriCorps match requirement grows from 24% to 50% and then maxes out at 50%. This change doesn't occur above 24% until year 4. So the first 3 years are each 24%. if you received a planning grant at any time that year, doesn't count in figuring out if you're in the first 3 years of a project. The planning grant was, think of it as a, put that aside. You received that as a separate project, and we're going to not count it in our years of the actual program. All right, please ask questions. I'm not sure. I feel like in my interest in being speedy, it feels to me like I may not have explained that very well. But I do think that folks often misunderstand how much match is required from them. So in the notice of funding, it's pretty explicit to give you an idea of helping you calculate the amount of match that's required. And it gives you a mathematical formula to help you arrive at the amount of funding that is going to be necessary in your budget to achieve that 24%. Because a lot of times we think, oh, we asked for $100,000, so our match requirement is 24,000, 24% of 100,000. But that's not actually how the 24% is calculated. It's it's 24% of the total grant. So it's 24% of both the amount that AmeriCorps is providing and the amount that the grantee is providing. So please look to see that formula in the notice of funding. In our example of the MSY 9.08 MSY project receiving $236,000, you would need approximately $75,000 in matching funds to give you a sense of the scale that we're talking about. And the total project would be above $310,000, which is what's described in this slide. You'll be able to also access this afterwards if you want to work through the math of it, which is what I do using an old-fashioned calculator. I want to point out that in our notice, we do describe the living allowance and the education award in more detail. AmeriCorps members are not employees, but they can receive a cash stipend, a living allowance through your payroll system. So if you pay weekly, bi-weekly, the AmeriCorps members would follow the same pattern. AmeriCorps offers specific requirements on the maximum that you can provide in living allowance. That table's on the screen. It reaches into $37,400 next year for a full-time member. Of course, you'll have noticed that the grant itself only pays $26,000. So living allowance can often be the largest budget item in your project. And if you're providing 25, 26,000 or more, you can see how the AmeriCorps grant already doesn't supply the full amount of the cost of the program. There's a question in the chat. Are members paid equal portions of their living allowance every pay period, even if they work less of their hours in the spring and more hours in the summer? So well, we could address that specifically. Becomes a little complicated because traditionally, yes, members are paid equal portions of their living allowance every pay period. You can develop a specific written policy about how you're paying a living allowance and why, that would have kind of minimum hours. So would have to be something that we think more carefully about. But the preference would be that the AmeriCorps member receives the same amount. It's $500, every week or whatever it is, like clockwork, regardless of whether they serve 4 hours that week or 12 hours that week or 25 hours that week. And the reason for that is AmeriCorps says so. The reason they say so is they're really drawing a distinction between paying someone like you would an hourly employee or a salary. The intent of the living allowance is to support someone's living. So the only reason it should change is if living expenses change. And that might be because one person lives in a city and one person lives in a rural community, or, there's inflation and we've decided to increase the living allowance, etc. I'm gonna keep that question and write a more thoughtful written response in our Q&A. I just want to, I want to get going forward a little bit here very quickly to wrap up. We mentioned before the website www.survivalland.com/grants for all of the resources. You'll find there a description of performance measures, a template that you can use to help create a cost reimbursement budget, as well as links to videos, if that's how you like to learn more about AmeriCorps program design. One of the things I wanted to highlight for you already is the need to register with sam.gov. And if you haven't done so already, create your username and password to the eGrant system so that you can become a little bit familiar with what you're going to be working with in terms of completing this application. We recommend, of course, that you do your thinking and writing kind of outside of eGrants and come back ready into that computer system, ready to copy and paste pieces of text and information following the prompts that are in there. But it helps to get your account open and started, so you can get familiar with it. One of the questions I want to address is something called e-civis. So the state of Rhode Island has implemented a new grant system called e-civis. The Rhode Island Department of Education is working with what's called the Office of Management and Budget to phase in our federal programs into e-civis. The decision was made in this competition to use the e-grants, the AmeriCorps grant system for the application process, and to pause adaptation to e-civis. So if you're listening to me and you're applying to an AmeriCorps grant this spring for the March 30th deadline, you do not need to know what e-civis is for AmeriCorps. Create an account or start to access it. But that will be part of our future as this Rhode Island Department of Education starts to adapt this new platform that is being implemented across the entire state of Rhode Island. All the state agencies are using, but for now, you can ignore that word e-civis. There are, however, 4 main things that you need to do to apply. One is to submit an intent to apply web form just really asks for your name and some basic information so that you can make sure that we are communicating with folks who are interested in applying any changes or updates to the process. You can fill that out at any time before March 30th, but the sooner the better. And you can access that web form at the website that we always mention, servertisland.com/grants. The application itself takes place in eGrants. You'll submit in there a narrative response to the notice of funding, as well as your budget numbers and the performance measure that you've selected, the outcome in the community that you aim to achieve. There are also some requests for additional documents. You email those as attachments to serve.ri at ride.ri.gov, which filters just directly to me. And one of the main additional documents that is listed in the notice is a signed statement of assurances that we want to receive before deciding to award a grant. And it goes through all of sort of the state procurement requirements, and as well as terms and conditions that are typical with AmeriCorps grants that your organization is agreeing to be bound to if you receive these funds. My pause as I'm reading the chat. When it comes to sam.gov, every organization should have one active registration, which provides something called a unique entity identification number from the federal government. But I think individuals can have more than one account to access their organizational record. So the question was, should we have only one sam.gov account? It's usually centralized by the folks by either an executive director or folks who do finance for your organization. And you might need to collaborate with other, staff members at your organization to find out if you already have sam.gov registration. If we have members based at 2 separate sites and we have an overall AmeriCorps program manager, do we also need program managers on site? Not necessarily. I think that, site is kind of there are 2 different types of sites. There are sites that are part of your organization, but are physically, geographically different. And there are sites that actually involve a different community partner because it's their place of operations or their organization. So if it's a different community partner, we like to know that there's a written agreement about what the responsibilities are, a memorandum of understanding between you and the partner. But if it's just a physical space, then you can describe to us what supervision looks like, which does not need to be a program manager on site at all times. I want to highlight just a few things as we wrap up here, because my intent was to end 11. Of course, I always do this and then just be talking to you now. And this presentation will be made available to you. But when it comes to the spelling error there, the narrative that you're going to be writing, the exact questions appear in the notice of funding opportunity. I just want to highlight that reviewers want to be able to clearly understand what your AmeriCorps members are doing on a daily basis. And that's important to convey in your application, sort of like visually understand what a daily or weekly routine is for the AmeriCorps member. AmeriCorps members are not employees, therefore they don't work and they don't get hired. They serve, they volunteer, they get recruited and placed. And we just sort of think about a little bit how you use language to describe the project. The notice of funding has questions in a specific order, and we make the scoring form available. It's not on the website currently. I will make sure it's there by 9 a.m. this coming Monday. But there's an order laid out, and it's useful to follow that order, to use the same headings that appear in the notice of funding so that the folks reviewing the application understand that you're addressing specific aspects of the application. The style of writing can be kind of abrupt or scientific. It doesn't need to be flowy or Shakespeare in its intent. I do think it's important to explain how things are getting done, not just that you intend to do things, but that you have an understanding of who's responsible, when it occurs, what system might be used to make it happen. Another thing I want to point out is that the eGrant system has built within it a logic model where you can, when you get to that part, it invites you to fill out a complex table through a series of rows. And for this competition, I'm saying don't use that. This is described in the notice as well. You can simply type in C narrative or anything you want that's polite. NA, not applicable if that's your preference, to complete a row in the logic model and to have eGrants satisfied that a logic model has been entered. We want you to have a logic to your program. We want you to address the same questions that a logic model would ask in terms of what are the activities that the AmeriCorps members are doing, who are they targeting to serve, and how many people are they going to serve. But those questions are all incorporated into the narrative itself, where we ask about the program design and in fact ask those very specific same questions. So we do not need to see them in the logic model table format that you will find in eGrants when you dig into the application. There is, however, a performance measure module where you identify a pair of an output and an outcome that describe the primary service activity. What I mean by this is you teach a number of students, that's an output, and the outcome is they learn something. So there's two pieces to every performance measure. We do need you to follow the step-by-step instructions that are in the notice of funding opportunity about entering a performance measure in the eGrants application system. To identify what performance measure makes the most sense for your project, you need to refer to a document called the National Performance Measure Instructions, which, like the notice, is at the .com/grants website. It will go by kind of the focus areas of education versus health versus environment. And within that, identify some typical output and outcome pairs that we think you'll be able to use to describe your grant activities, and align with the intent of typical AmeriCorps grants. If for any reason you're not able to select a performance measure, you can, it's described in there that you can say, we have determined for ourselves our own applicant measure, and um, you can go forward and describe that. But there still needs to be a pairing of an output and an outcome in the module. And I would encourage you to submit a question to me when you get to that point in your application process, so that I can help navigate you through the performance measure instructions. If you're submitting for a cost reimbursement grant, I would encourage you to look at the template that's on our website. The budget is going to ask you to identify both personnel and any benefits they receive, any travel, training, or supplies. And then separately, the living allowance that you're going to be supplying to the AmeriCorps members. It's important in the budget that you explain where it allows you to kind of describe your calculation. You know, why is it that you're asking for $150 for t-shirts? You might write something like, we're going to give 10 AmeriCorps members a $15 t-shirt. So writing out how you arrived at your figures is part of the process of developing your budget. Yeah. And I'm kind of pausing there